as a teacher and the income I was getting, I couldn't see myself having good future financial independence from that. And while at the time I was enjoying, being a teacher, I couldn't really see like how I was going to set myself up and have, I guess I always had in my mind I wanted to have that dream home, and I was fortunate enough to be teaching in some nice schools, around the eastern suburbs. People had these massive houses and they had like swimming pools in the houses. I mean, some of them might have had sharks in the pools, and who knows what they had, and big cars. And I thought, how do these people afford these things?
Good morning, Lloyd, and welcome back to the studio for another episode of Positively Geared.
Hi, Amanda. How you going?
Very well. Up nice and early again this morning?
Always.
Oh, very good. Good to see. Well, I've got a question for you today. So it's 2025. Lloyd's a school teacher again and just about to start his portfolio. What would you do differently?
What I'll do differently? That is a very, very good question. And, well, really, I guess the first thing to do is I'd probably take some advice, because that's something I didn't do in the first place. So just to take everybody back to how I started, first property I bought was an apartment, and I lived in that. I actually lived in that for about 5 years. It was a new apartment, not off the plan, but a new apartment, quite well located, just by accident, just because I actually bought it where I was living before, so in the same suburb that I was living in, which is in Rockdale in Sydney. So close to the water, close to the train station, just near the shops. So all the things that make a pretty good sort of investment, but only by accident, really.
What year was that, Lloyd?
So that was going back to about 2002.
Yep.
And lived there for about 5 years. And then, the investment bug sort of caught me, and I didn't think I'd be able to do anything because I had no interest in sort of property at the time. I was sort of just teaching, and then I thought, what if I, tried to buy another property? I thought, I might need to move into something bigger. So I thought I'd sell this property and then buy something bigger. But then I spoke to my mortgage broker. I think I might have read a couple of articles or something about how I don't have to sell my property. I could actually keep my property and buy another one. So that's what I did. I got my finance in place for another property. So I bought another property and I moved into it and then used Rockdale as an investment, rented it out. And then I lived in the next property I bought for a couple of years, and then I moved out of it and moved into another property that I'd bought and then rented out my second property. The problem with that is I kept buying properties to live in, and then they become investments. And that's not really a very good strategy. There's no strategy behind that. And they were just all in Sydney at the time, and not necessarily in any particular suburb that made much sense, other than the fact that that's what I could afford at the time. And then, after that, I sought a little bit of advice and then bought in Blackwater.
Do you still have that property in Blackwater? I don't know.
I do.
That. You still have it?
I do still have that property because it's a reminder of what not to do.
Okay.
And when people come to me and say, I really want to have a really high yielding property, I don't mind where it is.
Yeah.
I can say, you do mind where it is because I have one.
Yeah.
And this is not where you're going to buy your property. Is
that like a case study in your office there, just sitting there for everyone to read?
Yeah, it's just up on the whiteboard. Look at this property. You do not want this one.
Yeah.
And then obviously a little bit after that, I started to develop strategies and started to really get into investing, and then I guess in a sense...
Well, what twigged in your mind to go along this path? Because you went from being a music school teacher to a property investor to a buyer's agent.
Yeah, well, I guess before we get into that, I just what I'd do differently though to start with is that I would actually rentvest, because at the time I was buying properties to live in, and then I'd move out and then I'd buy another property to live in and things like that. The better strategy that I'd recommend, and that I would recommend for people today, is to actually rentvest. So just I could have just rented somewhere to live in Rockdale or somewhere close to Rockdale, and then I could just buy investments that made sense, around the country. Rather than just in Sydney. So I just didn't really have any strategy at the time. But we can get into that. But in terms of why I got into investing, that was really because I felt that as a teacher and the income I was getting, I couldn't see myself having good future financial independence from that. And while at the time I was enjoying being a teacher, I couldn't really see like how I was going to set myself up and have, I guess I always had in my mind I wanted to have that dream home, and I was fortunate enough to be teaching in some nice schools, around the eastern suburbs. People had these massive houses, and they had like swimming pools in their houses. I mean, some of them might have had sharks in the pools, and who knows what they had. Mm-hmm. And big cars, and I thought, how do these people afford these things? And like, here's little Lloyd, and he's got his little apartment, and I'm trying to traveling to these schools, and I'm thinking there must be a way that people can afford these things. So that's kind of piqued my interest a bit, and I thought, investing, starting something through property that's tangible is really what got me going. And obviously I started to read some literature, some books after a while, things like Rich Dad Poor Dad, and then a number of other books and things. So
what would be your top 3 books that you probably read back then? Would you read them again today?
Rich Dad Poor Dad was definitely a book that was quite inspiring. Mm-hmm. Not all the books I read, and I've read a lot of property books, and by a lot of other
we don't have to mention all their names here.
Well, they're actually, I've mentioned a lot of names in my own book. I've actually got recommended reading lists, which includes other sort of authors in Australia and stuff. And I've read those books. But some of the books that are my favourite books, though, are by sort of entrepreneurs and people that I find quite inspirational. So, for example, Mark Brewers and his book, What It Takes, is one of my favourite. And obviously he built up his Yellow Brick Road franchises, and of course Jean Ellis, and she wrote The Accidental Entrepreneur. That was a book that I really enjoyed. So a few books like that kind of really inspired me in terms of how to get ahead in wealth. And I guess that wasn't so much property focused, but that was also just about building business and stuff as well, which I found sort of useful later on, I guess. So reading is important to get that education, things like that. But there's nothing like getting out there and doing it. Making mistakes, talking to other people in the industry who have done things, and sort of asking questions and stuff like that. But what I would have done differently would be just to have a plan, know what I want to achieve, and then start working to that plan. Because once I actually had a strategy in place, then I managed to achieve my goals sort of within a sort of a 10 to 12 year time frame. But of course, the first 4 or 5 years was probably wasted of that, because I was just fluffing around, buying properties to live in, and had no real strategy and didn't really know what I was doing.
All right. So once you then discovered that how I need a strategy and a plan, you put that in place, and you saw a huge difference in your return after you started doing that?
Well, I think the main thing for me was the value add strategy. So I bought a block of land, built a duplex, and I think the real turning point for me, and again, I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, and I bought a block of land, sort of did some numbers, but had never really worked with a builder before. Didn't really know what to expect.
Did you find that very daunting when you first? I've just bought a block of land and I'm going to build a house. I'm going to build a duplex.
Yeah, it was a bit daunting. I mean, they were easy enough to deal with. Council was tricky, especially when council come back with what I thought was pretty silly things at the time, like they wanted a certain different type of plant planted in the front yard, or different type of landscaping, or they wanted the orientation of the lounge rooms to be different and stuff like that. But the kicker for me was I basically made twice as much in terms of equity as what I was earning the whole year as a salary in terms of my work, and I thought, I'm onto something here, so I just need to repeat that process. That really got me going and piqued my interest. That doesn't necessarily mean that things suddenly took off and everything's...
Do you think it changed your mindset though, to say, hang on, this is definitely possible, it's doable, I've made some substantial money, I'm going to do this again?
Absolutely. It did change my mindset, and it did, like, even with that equity I made, I managed to refinance some of that equity out, and that helped me buy another property, and then I ended up going to another duplex deal and things as well. So I used that equity to get it to another property, and then the following year I bought 3 or 4 properties, and granted, back then your serviceability was a bit different. Getting lending from banks was a bit different than what it is today, so I'm certainly not comparing then to what things are today. It's still very doable to do these things today, because I still do them and my clients still do them. But just generally in terms of the way things were then, it was definitely something that really did get me going. And then I started to invest in different markets, and I didn't just do duplexes, I use those funds quite sensibly, and that's when I decided to also invest in other sort of blue chip markets. I bought my first investment in the Brisbane market at the time, and that was going back quite a while. I've still got that property. So and started to grow into different markets and build that portfolio from there, and then started to set a plan. And it wasn't long after that where I decided that teaching forever is not really for me.
Yep.
And I thought I really wanted to sort of set a plan to retire and just do this property thing full time.
So how many years from once you started to when you stopped teaching, how many years was that?
Well, from when I bought my first property, that was probably 13 years. But I think probably if I had the right strategies in the first place, then that probably would have all been sort of achieved in sort of 9 to 10 years. I kept growing the portfolio after that, but essentially once I had the right strategies in place, I managed to sort of get to what my goals, my passive income goals were at the time, which is basically replacing my teaching income.
Yeah.
And then I was able to retire from my teaching and then just keep sort of investing in property and going from there. I didn't have the ambition to be a buyer's agent at the time, or to grow a buyer's agency. That was not ever part of the plan.
I read that in your book, that it sort of just fell on you a little bit, where people started coming to you and asking you, well, what should I do? What should my strategy be?
Well, that's exactly right. So the way that kind of happened is, I guess initially I was actually, it's a bit of a funny story. I used to talk a lot about property at home, and my wife, Renee, sort of said, I'm sick of you talking about property, you should write a blog about it, so that I don't have to listen to you talk about property all the time. So I ended up, writing blogs, and the blog was actually called Oz Property Power Hour. So that was actually the name prior to actually starting our company, Oz Property Professionals. It was called Oz Property Power Hour. I was just writing blogs, putting it out there. I didn't have any SEO or anything on it, so it probably wasn't getting too many readers or anything like that. I didn't know anything about that stuff back then. But it had a few readers because I was getting people contacting me wanting to know a little bit more. And then I was featured a little bit I know I was on sort of 2GB radio at one stage, and I was on maybe the API magazines as an investor that I'd been doing a bit of successful stuff. And then I just had sort of people contact me saying, I just wanted a little bit of help, and that's kind of how things started.
What help did they sort of want when they first contacted you? Did you find the questions were quite similar they were asking you?
Well, people just wanted to know a little bit more about what I'd done, how did I go about building a duplex, and some of them wanted to know if I could help them. And at the time, I didn't have any property qualifications or a license or anything like that. So I was just sort of giving them free, unofficial advice. I couldn't give them any proper advice, but I was just sort of giving them a bit of a helping hand, and suggested they might like to do this, might like to do that, and stuff like that. But it just sort of evolved from there. And then I really enjoyed helping people. And one of the things that I'd do would be to meet people in sort of coffee shops and just have a chat to them about property. And I absolutely loved doing that.
And your wife was happy too, because you weren't talking to her at night about property all the time. Yeah.
She loved it, and it's quite funny because nowadays I listen to her talking about handbags, but maybe I should tell her to go and
start a podcast.
Start a podcast, or go to the cafe and talk about handbags.
It'd be very, very popular.
That's right. But no, that's really what happened, and then that was. That's how it all started, and then I talked about with Renee, and she said you should try to get something going and be able to help people officially. So that's when I went and did some study, got my diploma in property, which allowed me then to go and get licensed and things like that, and did a few other qualifications. The diploma, which essentially is a qualification that they allow you up to about 3 years to get. I did it in 3 months because I was doing it online. I was doing it at night, and I was I'd get up at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning, go to work. I'd start teaching 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd knock off at 4 o'clock. I'd go home, and then I'd study all night and do the assessments and things till about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was literally having about 2 or 3 hours sleep every night. For about 3 months, and I was just, bashing my way through, the assignments and stuff. Got my qualifications done, so that I could then sort of be licensed to sort of start the business and be able to officially help people in property and through being a buyer's agent. So that's essentially how that started back in the day.
All right, and then what brought the book on, the first edition?
The reason for writing the book was, I guess, a little bit different to why a lot of people write books. It wasn't for the reason of trying to sell my services or anything like that. I was happy at the time with the amount of clients we had, and we're quite busy. It was more around, I thought I had a story, and I kind of should get it out there. So the book was because I had a story of where, actually retiring from teaching and getting into a sort of another profession and actually creating wealth through property and how I did it. I thought, I should sort of document that. At the time, I thought, no one's probably going to want to read this. But I thought I'd give it a go anyway. So I sort of talked about my whole backstory, starting from when I was growing up, and when I was growing up on the farm, and when I studied music at university and things like that, and a little bit about my teaching and how I fell into property. So he talked a little bit about what I guess been talking about today, and then talked about the strategies that I used with property, and then talked about I guess you use case studies of some of my own investments and developments, but also some of our clients, not to show off or spruik what we do or anything, but just to show people what is actually possible, and that these are real people that came to me, and this is their situation, and this is what I helped them do, essentially. So I just sort of put them there, because people like sort of reading that kind of information and relating that back to themselves.
It's relatable, and it's a bestseller, isn't it?
It is the bestseller. So it's actually the best-selling property investment book in Australia for the last 10 years. So it's number one in that space, and it's the second best-selling book in Australia in that space of all time. So it's done very well. But that's interesting, because I never imagined that it would actually do that well. And when I was writing it, I was thinking, like, who's going to read
it?
Yeah, like for me,
it's a good read. It is a good read.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. But for me, it was just about getting information out there, and as I wrote the book, I sort of started to talk about the different markets. A lot of that around where I'd bought in. So I talked about places like the Newcastle, the Central Coast markets, and a few of the interstate markets and stuff as well. So it wasn't just case studies on what people had done, but it's also case studies on the markets themselves. Why would I buy on the Central Coast? Why would I buy on the Sunshine Coast? What are the demographics there? What the infrastructure like there? And just to educate people. And
it's your thinking, it's your mind in there. It's your thinking of saying, why I bought that.
Yeah.
So in 2025, Lloyd starting again. Really, it sounds like your best piece of advice is get as much information as you can.
Absolutely, yeah. Just get yourself educated. Don't jump in there without getting yourself educated. Get some help, and do some reading. Do some reading. Talk to people. Don't jump in there until you're pretty well armed with what you need to know, because like the first investment you buy needs to be something that really does set you up well. So you need to be careful of that.
Right, we've spoken of that, so you can buy your second, your third, your fourth to create the income you want. All right. Well, we've now got a new book in 2025, the updated version. What's changed in the new book?
Yeah, so in the updated version, I guess one of the things that's really important for people to understand is that the first version, which was released going back about 6 years now, 5 or 6 years, is that the markets have moved along. Construction prices have increased, during COVID. The markets have increased in general. We've had a lot of issues with inflation, with interest rates and things. But particularly when people look at case studies in my first book, and the price points that's not that relevant to today. So I like to be sort of transparent with people, and when with people sort of looking at case study, then they sort of ring us up and have a bit of a chat, and they say, oh yeah, well I saw in the book you did a duplex with this much.
It's possible today.
It's kind of like, well, actually we can't really do it for that much today. So I've kind of updated the book with case studies from today's market. This is how much people have spent today, and this is still the results that they got. So while it costs more to do certain types of projects, you can still get the results, and this is what the results are. But I also talk a lot about the interest rate climate, and also inflation, and the effect that's had on interest rates, and where the RBA needs that to be, so the interest rates start coming back, and of course talked about the increasing construction costs and the supply chain delays and stuff, so making that all relevant. But the other thing that's also important is where to invest. So one of the things that I do talk a lot about in the books, as I mentioned about the first one, is sort of my ideas on where to invest. So
do you think that's changed since the first edition to second edition? You've changed where you think you should invest?
Yeah, absolutely, because I do like to go where the research and the data is pointing. Looking at the infrastructure, the population growth, the jobs growth into markets, how much the government is investing into a market, and everything like that. So, for example, in the new book, there's a complete chapter on Brisbane and how the Olympics are going to affect Brisbane. Mm-hmm. And that's quite an interesting read for people, I think. Whereas previously I sort of talked about Newcastle and Sunshine Coast markets. Yep. Now, those markets are still fine, but the Sunshine Coast market has really had substantial growth, not necessarily a place I'd be tipping as the number one place to invest now, because it's already had substantial growth. But I think there's good long-term growth we had in somewhere like Brisbane. But I also go into detail about the other markets in the other states. What's happened in Perth. In my first book, I talked about how Perth had negative 13% growth from 2010 to 2020, and in that same decade, Darwin had minus 11% growth, while the Eastern Seaboard, all the states over here had positive growth. But then we sort of talk about, Perth's had been quite bullish, had quite a lot of growth the last couple of years. So, where's that sitting now? And what's the potential for that? How reliant is it on the resources? Has that changed? Has my opinion on that changed? Because I'm quite well documented in sort of my opinions on Perth, but I like to sort of talk about how that's changed and things like that. Then we've got the Melbourne market and the land tax that's been brought in by the Andrews government. Andrews is not in government at the moment, but the Labor government is still there, and that land tax issue that they've got down there has really flattened the market there. So talking about that. So all those sort of things are sort of covered in detail in the book, just for people's general knowledge, and if for no other reason, to give people some information so they're armed with the knowledge for when they go in and sort of start investing in the markets. Because I think with people, particularly if they're, you might be based in Melbourne and you want to buy close to home, which is something I never advise people to do. You really should have a strategy in place, not just to buy close to where you live, but if you do wish to buy close to home, you need to be armed with the right information. It's like, should I buy in Melbourne as opposed to buying somewhere else? An example of that is if you buy, say, a $400,000 property in Victoria, the stamp duty will be approximately $20,000. But if you buy that same property, that same price point in Queensland, the stamp duty is only about $13,000. So there's a $7,000 difference in stamp duty. Mm-hmm. So you need to understand those changes, because that's an additional cost to the actual price point of the property. So that's where you really got to get educated on what's right, where to buy. Do you have the cash available to buy the property, and is that going to affect your general cash flow over time and the yield on that property? And
if people are looking to pick up your book, do you think they need to read the first edition and the second edition, or you think they're okay just reading the second edition now?
I think they're okay just reading the second edition. So I think the opening chapter still talks about my background, which is I think interesting for people, because it's not just getting straight in and talking about markets.
Yeah, and that's why I asked that question.
It's also talking about where I'm coming from and where I've been and stuff like that as well. Yep.
So what's your ultimate goal with your books, your podcast? What are you looking for in the future?
Okay, my ultimate goal in terms of my books and my podcast is really to educate people. And I think with my books, particularly with the first edition of Positively Geared, was dedicated to my first son, Riley, and my By Now was dedicated to Kaylin, who's my second son. That's my kid that was born during COVID, when my wife told me I should never write a book when she was pregnant with him, and that was a bit of a running joke we have then.
So is there a third child? Is that what you're saying?
There's no, it's not what I'm saying. Absolutely not. But that's a bit of a legacy for them to know that I've had something dedicated to them. But those books are just for I like to have that legacy for them, but also the education content for people and things like that. But my ultimate goal with investing is really to set up. Well, there's a couple of things, but really to set up my family with everything that they need for the future. So my son's starting school this year, so I kind of set everything up really before the kids were born. But just so we're able to live in the home we want, send the kids to school and live the lifestyle we want. And to make sure that my wife and the kids are looked after, into the future and things like that. So that's essentially that part of it. But the bigger picture for me is also what I can do for for charity to help people sort of in the future. This is not something I talk about very much. I have mentioned it in Positively Geared, which is why I'm happy to talk about it now. It's not something I tend to talk about too much on social media or anything, but one of the goals I do have is to get over to Nepal and Africa and try to help with education, build housing for children that are less fortunate than we are and things like that. And when my kids get older, I'd like to sort of take them over there and sort of educate them on that, and so they can see who's less fortunate than them and all that kind of stuff. That's a goal that's kind of been in my head.
Goals.
Yeah, and that's a goal that's been in my head since back years ago. I climbed to Mount Everest base camp, and also I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and then spent some time in these third world countries. And it's been and I've been to Africa a couple of times, so it's been a bit of a passion of mine. COVID kind of got in the way of being able to get over and do things at the time, and then I didn't know it at the time, but then of course since then I've had kids, and that kind of gets in the way. I've been able to take too many overseas trips, but the bigger picture is being successful with property, and I guess this is where my business comes into it a bit too. Is it gives me the leverage and the time and the money to be able to get over and help people like that. Because people often ask me why do I do this, like in business, when I could just be sitting on a beach being retired, and essentially, like I couldn't just sit on the beach and do nothing because I'd be bored. Yeah. But the other thing is that there's always a bigger picture for what I'm trying to do. It's not because I'm trying to make more money personally, but there's just a bigger picture that I have in mind, and it's what I'm trying to sort of do long term.
Okay, all right, very noble. All right, Lloyd, that brings us to our part of our podcast where we've got Ed's deal. So I'm going to put to you properties today, and you're going to tell us if they're a good deal or bad deal. Are you ready?
Good, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's start. So the first one is number 8A Gladstone Street, Mudgee. So I'm sure you know where that is. Price guide is 700 to 750. Land size is 1,690 square metres. The agent, I know you like them. Ideal opportunity to renovate or subdivide, subject to council approval. It'll probably rent for around $700 a week because it's quite a large home with a pool. Have a think of that. The yield is 5.2% if you work it out on $700 a week. That's our first deal.
Look, for me, it's got potential to subdivide. I think when you're buying an area like that, it'd be nice to maybe you develop that and build a couple of holiday homes, because you go there and stay there and you drink some good wine.
Yeah.
I always think that when you're looking at a price guide around 700, 750, that's quite high to be spending in a regional market like that. So, buying a home like that as an investment and just holding it as an investment like that wouldn't be the best way to spend your money, especially something with a pool. Yeah. So you'd need to have a strategy where you're actually going to develop that. So you'd need to have more funds to be able to actually knock down the place, get an approval in place, subject to if you can do that, and then develop on it. But it comes down to whether then you can actually make any money, depending on what you can actually build on it. Because looking at that land size, you might be able to put in maybe 3 townhouses, but looking at the cost of that versus already spending $750 on the block, the numbers may not work out. So I'll put that in the maybe. I need to look at that closer, but probably there'll be better opportunities around than that one.
The next one I got is 25 Crest Reef Drive, Arcadia Gardens, Western Sydney. They've got a price guide of 1.3, must be sold. I don't think there's any development opportunity. It's a nice house. Probably rent for about $800 per week. Near Quakers Hill. I'll have a look at that one.
That is a no deal. So
if
you are looking for a home to live in, that might be the home you want. That could be your dream home. As an investment, I wouldn't be spending. Auction guide. Yeah. I like how they say auction guide must be sold. Yeah. So auction could go for more than that. I'm pretty familiar with the area, but I wouldn't be buying an investment and spending that. That comes down to your strategy. Spending 1.3 on one property, you'd probably be better off spending maybe around 600 to 700K on an investment, and then you've got room left to buy another investment. You could buy something like that with a much better yield, maybe in the Brisbane market, and then you could visit maybe the Adelaide or the Melbourne markets for something at a similar price. Buy 2 properties, both yield better, different markets, than spending it all on the one property. So I would say out of today's, I would say they're probably all no deals. I would take a closer look at the Mudgee one, but for me, it's probably going to be a no deal.
There you go. I think that's a good lesson there as well. You don't have to buy it.
You definitely don't have to buy it. And like I've said to you previously, we say no to more properties than we actually buy. And if we don't say no to them, we often miss out because we don't want to pay as much as what someone else does anyway.
Mm-hmm.